Hello, everybody, and welcome back to coverage of Pro Tour Kaladesh. I'm Gabby Sparks, joined today by Luis Scott Vargas, and we have awesome Magic lined up for you today. Let's head down to the feature match. Our players are ready. Hello, and welcome back to coverage of Pro Tour Kaladesh. I'm Gabby Sparks, joined today by Luis Scott Vargas, and our main match is going to be Pat Cox, sitting there on the left. He's a gold pro from the U.S. versus the Dragon Master, Brian Kibler, over on the right, Hall of Famer. Looks like the matchup is going to be Temur Aetherworks versus Red Green Energy.
Particularly notable is these two prepared together. Pat Cox, of course, on Team Channel Fireball, and Brian Kibler on what we're calling Team Channel Fireball and Associates. That's actually what the team
What is
booked.
the Associates?
Well, the team booked a conference room to test for the whole week, and, and the name for the conference room was Team Channel Fireball and Associates. So I believe that makes Kibler an associate.
What does this track to make partner?
Yeah.
Do you know? Do you get to decide that?
Hey, well, I've given up my veto power, so I don't actually make that decision anymore. But the matchup, despite them both playing Temur, is actually two very different decks. So
you are intimately familiar with how this deck functions, right? Do you want to give everybody a breakdown? It is kind of an interesting deck.
Yeah, so Pat Cox is playing Temur Aetherworks, so it uses Aetherworks Marvel, and its goal is to get up to 6 energy using cards like Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot and Glassblower's Puzzle Knot, Attune with Ether, that sort of thing. And then play Aetherworks Marvel, use it, and hit either Emrakul the Promised End or Ulamog, and able to exile a bunch of your opponent's permanents or take control of their turn, and just have a giant Eldrazi in play on turn 4. Kozilek's Return, a card which Pat actually has in his hand right now, also gets triggered because Aetherworks Marvel plays the card. It actually casts it. So you're able to get the cast trigger off of Kozilek's Return, off of Emrakul, off of Ulamog, and that is it ends up being a very powerful interaction. I believe the Temur Aetherworks deck is the most powerful deck in Standard right now, though it is vulnerable to sideboard cards.
And in your experience, how consistently does it manage to do that?
The deck is built completely around that. It does a pretty good job of finding Aetherworks Marvel, using cards like Glint Nest Crane, Glassblower's Puzzle Knot, and Vessel of Nascency, and then getting to 6 energy.
Well, a lot has a transition here in this game. It looks like Brian was attacking with a lot of power here, but a Kozilek's Return from Patrick is going to stop the Voltaic Brawler there on its tracks. The Latnu Hellion continues to be on the battlefield, though he is preserving his life total and getting the return in the graveyard, which we'll be able to trigger back later in this game.
And so Pat using one of the key cards to the deck is Glint Nest Crane, which is kind of funny because it's a deck that only has 12 artifacts, but it gets you 4 cards closer to Aetherworks Marvel whether it hits or not, and that's all the deck wants to do. The Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot you see there also does both things that that Pat wants, which is to give him 3 lives to survive something like Latnu Hellion, and also to bump up his energy count.
Well, and a very quick game win from Owen Turnwald versus Ben Whites in one of our back tables.
Yeah, and the reason Owen's up a game so quickly, he's playing Aetherworks as well. He's playing Temur Aetherworks, and he's presumably, not knowing what exactly transpired, just had a turn 4 Eldrazi.
Looks like a Bristling Hydra coming down for Brian Kibler.
All right, so Pat has an Aether Hub in hand. He's going to be able to go up to 6 energy. If he's got Aetherworks Marvel here, then he's threatening to go off, and let's see what he does.
It's happening! All right, activate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Did you find anything?
That looks like an Emrakul the Promised End.
It is.
And that is exactly why Pat chose to use it on his main phase.
Kibler just picks up everything so quickly.
I've never seen someone pick up cards so fast.
That was, well, he tested with him. He knows exactly what happens from this point. So that was a very quick game 1 here from Pat Cox.
Yeah, and things went pretty marvelously for Pat. He was able to hit Emrakul, flashing back Kozilek's Return, and taking control of Brian's turn.
We will be back with more Magic right after these messages.
Support your local game store by going to Friday Night Magic. Have fun hanging out with friends, cracking new Magic packs, and playing with your favorite Kaladesh cards. Featuring devious gremlins, ingenious dwarves, and face-smashing gearhulks.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to coverage of Pro Tour Kaladesh. We're going to be taking a look at one of our back tables. This is going to be Yuya Watanabe, currently sitting at 4-1. He's playing Brian Kibler versus Zach Elsick, also at 4-1 with Jeskai control. Looks like a Nahiri coming down for Zach.
Yeah, and you see some familiar faces here. Glassblower's Puzzlenaut, Woodweaver's Puzzlenaut, and Aetherworks Marvel, though. Zach's playing a deck with main deck negates, so that Aetherworks Marvel is in the graveyard where, from Zach's perspective, where it
belongs.
Yes. And Yuya, a very interesting. It's not the standard teamer list. He's giving up on red spells, and in order to get access to Tamiyo, so the field researcher, powerful planeswalker, and then Spell Queller. Yuya has 4 copies of Spell Queller in his main deck, so he's playing a much more interactive game than most of the Marvel decks. And I have to imagine this looks pretty good in the Marvel mirror, having access to Spell Queller.
Does it make it worse against the field overall, you think?
Giving up on Kozak's return is a pretty big sacrifice. Kozak's return is critical at clearing boards and making sure you don't get too far behind.
Would you say that it's one of the tougher matchups for the Aetherworks deck?
Without Kozak's return, aggro can be tough. With Kozak's return, I think aggro is generally pretty good.
Gotcha.
So Zach's actually got Nahiri on 8, and what can Zach Nahiri out? Well, no Emrakul's, nothing like that, but Zach can Nahiri out a Torrential Gearhulk, which is fairly powerful, or potentially a Dynavolt Tower, though I think that's a little less desirable than getting a Torrential Gearhulk out of your deck. Zach, primarily known for being one of the innovators of Lantern Control. He top 16 in Grand Prix with it, and then won a Grand Prix with Lantern Control, and is a big fan of the deck.
It was actually quite funny. One of the events that I did coverage for in Dallas, somebody ran into Zach, and they were just small talking to him, and in the middle of the game, they're like, "Hey, did you go to the GP last week?" And he's like, "Yeah, how did it go?" So he stops, and he's like, I won with Lantern.
So you could say it went well.
Temur, a genius. Allowing him to scry 1 on top, 1 on the bottom, and then draw 2, also providing some energy.
Yeah, and with that Dynavolt Tower in play, that rocketed Zach all the way up to 8 energy, and I wonder if he's going to start using Dynavolt Tower to just take shots at you. It looks like it, not quite. I mean, given that you use it 23 thanks to the Woodweaver's Puzzlenaut, Zach doesn't really need to do that, but I guess Zach's content just taking up Nahiri and charging up Dynavolt Tower and eventually finding a win condition.
Yeah, that's exactly what he continues to do. Just another land, and we're going to see a pass back to Yuya.
26.
Yuya cracking this Puzzlenaut, getting him some energy, gaining him some life. He's at a very healthy life total, but nothing meaningful on the board yet.
That's another 26.
And
Looks like he's drawn an Ulamog.
And of note, if Zach waits too long, you could, first of all, you could hardcast Ulamog or Emrakul. Second of all, Zach only has 2 negates and 2 Void Shatters as actual hard counters, plus 4 copies of Torrential Gearhulk. So Zach doesn't have infinite counter spells, and Yuya could, if he hits 7 mana, have Aetherworks Marvel plus Spell Queller. But, given enough time, I think Yuya does have a better long game, so Zach doesn't have forever here.
Zach continuing to tick up his energy, continuing. Oh, this was a Nahiri Ultimate.
Yeah, it looks like Torrential Gearhulk is
It
likely
is.
the pick. It's a pretty sweet combo. You get Torrential Gearhulk back in an instant, attack with it, and then it bounces back to your hand, and you get to recast Torrential Gearhulk later
That is
for
awesome.
more value. It's kind of like Nahiriing for a Snapcaster Mage, a play that we've seen made before, but instead of getting a 2-1, you get a 5/6, and you don't have to pay mana for the spells. So it's also way, way better.
And it looks like we've seen an Armageddon here.
Their new sleeves.
So
Everybody's had that experience of new sleeves. Everything goes shuffling out.
Resolve limit. Both on bottom. 18.
And Zach's pressuring you pretty quickly now. The Nahiri Ultimate for a Torrential Gearhulk means that he gets 5 damage in now, got to Glimmer, which presumably should find him another counterspell, and then between Dynavolt Tower and Torrential Gearhulk, he's able to put a bunch of power onto the board. There's Needle Spires lurking down there. Yuya has just a couple turns here, despite having a fairly high life total to start with.
Well, Yuya did find an Aetherworks Marvel off the top, so things could get rolling from here. So there's a Torrential Gearhulk, another Glimmer, more energy. Scry does not like either. Draw 2 more. Man, these Glimmers have been doing some solid work for Zach. Dynavolt Tower dropping down Yuyan. Down to 15 now.
Glimmer of Genius is one of the best card draw spells in Standard right now and one of the best targets for Torrential Gearhook. Despite looking like, not a very efficient card, it actually ends up working out pretty well. We've seen it in multiple decks.
Gearhulk getting in there again. Incendiary Flow continuing to provide energy.
Yeah, between Incendiary Flow, Gearhulk, Dynavolt Tower, Yuya does not have a lot of time here. And Zach has a Void Shatter in his hand and a Negate, so I think Yuya is pretty locked out of this game.
It's been interesting to see how quickly Zach's deck just became incredibly aggressive, right? Yuya was at 26 a couple turns ago, and
yeah,
now he's at a mere 7.
Once the tables turn, the game ends very, very quickly.
All right, and there we see it. Zach takes this game. We are ready to head back to our main match, though. Let's take a look and see Patrick Cox versus Brian Kibler. So, Luis, moving post-board, anything interesting?
Well, as it turns out, Kibler's red-green energy deck splashes blue for 4 copies of Ceremonious Rejection and 2 negates. He even has an island in his sideboard to attune for. So, yes, the matchup gets much better for Kibler post-board. He's pretty well equipped to battle his teammates in this particular matchup.
All right, and as you called it, there goes the first attune with Ether, fetching an island. Oh, but that is actually Patrick, so no islands yet for Brian.
No, but he does have a Long Tusk Cub, which is... It's funny, Long Tusk Cub is secretly one of just the best cards in the Electrostatic Pummeler deck. It's just a very, very powerful card. It snowballs very quickly. So even though Kibler has 6 counterspells post-board, whether he finds blue mana is going to be a bit of a challenge. You see a Ceremonious Rejection in his hand right now. Though he does have an Ether Hub, so he's got a lot of sources of blue mana, but not enough that he can reliably end up always with blue mana plus a counterspell.
How many does he actually have?
Well, he essentially has 13 sources of blue mana if you count, or 14 sources if you count Servant of the Conduit, 10 without Servant. So
okay.
Kibler does run the risk of having blue cards and not blue mana, but in this particular instance, he's lined up both. So this is going to be a difficult game for Pat, though. From Pat's side of the board, he knows about Kibler's sideboard. They're teammates. One's a known associate of the other, if you will. And there's a chance that Pat, as a result, boarded in 1 or 2 dispels in order to counter Kibler's counterspells because Kibler, has counters for Aetherworks Marvel.
All right, so it looks like contingency plan for Pat.
Yeah, Contingency Plan is not the most powerful Magic card. You look at your top 5 cards and you put any amount on top and the rest in the graveyard. But what it does very, very well is look for a specific card. And in this case, that is Aetherworks Marvel. You see Pat with a handful of Ulamogs here, which is not really the state you want to be in when you're playing this deck.
Is part of the reason that you're so all in on this plan that it almost doesn't matter that you're down a card?
Yeah, if you combine Aetherworks Marvel plus one of the Eldrazi, then you're going to win the game regardless of what the last 5 cards in your hand are. So that is kind of what this deck's trying to do. It's probably the most linear deck in the format. It's playing cards like Contingency Plan. And as a result, yeah, you have dead draws sometimes. Sometimes you do end up drawing 2 Ulamogs or an Ulamog and an Emrakul and you end up in a pretty good amount of trouble.
What I'm also interested to hear is in game 1 we saw it execute its game plan flawlessly, right? Just find a number cool, win very quickly. We saw the quickest scoop in the world from Brian. And what happens when you miss?
Well, it's interesting. If the deck is under a lot of pressure and you miss, sometimes you just lose. You hit a Puzzle Knot or a Glutinous Crane off your Aetherworks Marvel and you die. But, for example, if in game 1, if Pat hadn't hit Emrakul, if he had hit, say, Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot instead, Brian would not have been able to kill Pat that turn, and then Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot would have given Pat another spin on Aetherworks Marvel. So Pat would have just had a chance to look at 6 more cards. One of the advantages of Kozilek's Return, of course, is it keeps creatures off your back so that you can take multiple shots with Marvel, because the deck's very good at getting energy. Pat has drawn Emrakul, the Promised End, so...
Yeah, I wanted to pull up Pat's hand, because this is a little clunky. Ulamog, Emrakul, the Promised End.
Yeah.
How many fatties do they play in their deck?
They play the full 8, 4 of each, 4 copies of each.
So there's still many to be found.
Yeah, Pat with a 37 converted mana cost hand here, which is not a total you want to hear.
All right. Blue mana is online for Brian.
And even though Brian does have the counterspell here, it actually doesn't matter because Pat just doesn't have Aetherworks Marvel, and that's one of the disadvantages of this deck because especially the way this particular version is built, it literally does not function if you don't draw Aetherworks Marvel. And granted, you have vessels, cranes, and contingency plans. You get to see like the top, third to half of your deck in most games, but sometimes all the Aetherworks Marvels are hiding, and then you end up in a spot where your deck just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, so Brian going to be sacking that clue, pumping the Tireless Tracker, drawing him an extra card as well. It looks like it's a Bristling Hydra. More counters in the Long Tusk Cub.
The tusks are growing longer as we speak, and that's going to put Pat on a 2-turn clock here.
Yeah, this looks like a cub no longer. Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot does gain him some life, but he is falling quite far behind.
You take a total of 6, 13. Sure.
All right, getting an update from one of our back tables. It looks like Ben Whites was able to come back after that incredibly fast win from Owen in Game 1, so they're going to be pushing it to a Game 3.
And I believe this one's going to Game 3 as well.
Indeed it is. Brian Kibler is able to even it out. They will be moving on to a Game 3.
Brian had 3 Ceremonious Rejections in his hand, something like that.
We're going to move into the match of Patrick Dickman versus Carlos Romao. It looks like Patrick is playing Black-Red Madness, and Carlos Romao is on Jeskai Control. Both players are currently at 4-1.
Yeah, and we saw a glimpse of Carlos's match last round as he defeated a Colossus deck. Now he's playing against the other end of the spectrum. Instead of 11 mana 10/10s, he's playing against 2 mana 3/2s.
They're actually in Game 1 still.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guess Dobin Bond maybe has something to say about that. But yeah, Jeskai Control is drawing out the game, though. It looks like Carlos is under a decent amount of pressure here. Uh-oh. Carlos's hand is pretty stacked. It looks like we're gonna see Quarantine Field in just a second, and the exiling effect of Quarantine Field does a very good job of stabilizing the board.
All right, so 2, 4, 6. And you can see Dickman is just has his
Probably exiling.
hands ready on his permanent.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You get exiled 4. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're counting up exactly what can get exiled here, and it's basically everything.
Yeah, Carlos just cleared the field here, and now Patrick is down to a Prized Amalgam, which he can't even cast, and
Yep,
I guess
and
that'll
that's
do
going to
it.
be the game right there. Moving on to Game 2, a long Game 1. Moving to the match of Yuya Watanabe versus Zach Elzik. Yuya is playing Ban Aetherworks, and Zach Elzik is on Jeskai Control, as we saw earlier.
Ooh, I like Yuya's sideboard plan. He boarded in Long Tusk Cub,
Okay.
and he's on the beatdown path. He's got Servant of the Conduit and Long Tusk Cub coming in here, which can be very effective, especially if Zach brought in, took out removal spells for more counter spells.
Mm-hmm. Been seeing a lot of this transformative sideboard plan. Is that something more common that happens more commonly with linear decks?
Yeah, if you have a deck that your opponent has a lot of dead cards against, you can sometimes board in cards like Long Tusk Cub to take advantage of those dead cards leaving their deck. Because all of a sudden, they took out their Fiery Tempers or they took out their Stasis Snares, and you just bring in Long Tusk Cubs, and they're like, oh, my hand is all Ceremonious Rejections and Negates.
Yeah, what do I do? It's very reminiscent of when control decks usually will, people slide out their removal against control decks because you have no targets, and then they just brain a couple creatures and then bash. Looks like a spell caller coming in at the end of the turn there for Zach.
And Zach could have gone for a block on the Servant of the Conduit. The Long Tusk Cub wouldn't have been a great block because you had 4 energy even before attacking. But Zach decided he didn't want to risk Aetherworks Marvel coming down. Oh, so Yuya did not sacrifice Evolving Wilds. A reason to do that is Evolving Wilds does trigger Aetherworks Marvel and Tireless Tracker, so it's possible that Yuya is ready and waiting for those cards to come up.
Yeah, so a couple counters on this cub.
And Yuya deciding whether to amp up the pressure now.
It looks like he is going to opt for that. Going up to 2. Long Tusk Cub, pretty impressive so far.
It's a very powerful card. I think Long Tusk Cub is a little underrated right now. Some of the energy decks only play 2, which I think is criminal. And then it's a very potent sideboard card. Team Channel Fireball also tested Long Tusk Cub in their sideboard for this exact reason. They ended up going with a different plan, but I do think it is a legit sideboard plan.
So Yuya was going for the play that you had mentioned earlier of saving that Evolving Wilds to be able to trigger the Tireless Tracker, though the second Spell Queller is going to take care of that Tireless Tracker.
Yeah, and Tireless Tracker, part of Yuya's transformative sideboard plan here, where he's got Tireless Trackers and Long Tusk Cubs, which do a pretty good job of pressuring the opponent, especially since Yuya doesn't necessarily have to board out his whole combo. He can still keep in some number of Marvels and large creatures to get. We can hear both players quickly flicking cards, which is a common soundtrack at Magic tournaments.
You familiar with the flicking card?
The reason I don't usually have an opportunity to flick cards because I usually just have
You mulligan so many.
Yeah,
you mulligan so much. You just have
man,
no cards.
you beat me to it. I don't think I'm
Like
that
this ain't my
predictable,
first rodeo.
Look, when you mulligan and scry to the bottom a lot, you just end up with so few cards in your hand. I don't even have 2 cards to flick together.
Looks like Spell Queller is getting in there. And then a Hiri. All right, so you might have some responses to this. All right, there you go. It's a negate. It was going to take care of the Long Tusk Cup, but no longer. Down goes Nahiri to the graveyard. Wandering Fumarole is a land for Zach, but we're going to see a pass back to Yuya.
Now you have to decide whether keeping this Evolving Wilds around is really what he wants to do.
This time he decides to actually crack it.
Yeah, I really like Yuya's deck. The fact that he's got Tamiyo and Descend Upon the Sinful is just very cool in this Aetherworks Marvel deck. Whether it's better than the more streamlined Temur version, I don't know the answer to that, but I do think that he's got some interesting choices, Spell Queller as well. The fact that Yuya does have main deck Spell Queller and Tamiyo means that he can actually morph very successfully into a kind of like a Bant aggro control deck. Part of the reason that the Team Channel Fireball Temur deck did not end up playing Long Tusk Cubs is that the deck was just not built to support it. Contingency plan is just not good in this sideboard plan, whereas Yuya's deck has a lot of more attrition-y cards like Spell Queller, so he can already support Long Tusk Cub.
Do you have any sense for which type of Aetherworks Marvel deck is better in this field?
It's really going to depend on how often you want to play fair games, because Yuya's playing a fair game here, and it's actually working out fairly well. He's got this Long Tusk Cub grinding out Spell Quellers, right and left. But when you play against the more linear decks, I think the more focused version is going to be more successful.
It looks like this game is still developing, but our main match is ready. So let's actually move back and see the final match between Pat Cox and Brian Kibler.
And Brian Kibler did mulligan here, so. We're going to see whether, how much that impacted him, especially since he's trying to assemble a number of different cards. He's trying to assemble probably like 2 threats as well as a blue mana source and a counterspell.
All right, so Attune is going to fetch a mountain here for Pat.
And it's interesting. The fact that Pat used Ether Hub to pay for Attune means that he doesn't have a Forest or a Botanical Sanctum in his hand. And so now Kibler knows that. It's not like super impactful information, but it is the kind of thing that it does add up and you should pay attention to.
Glynis Crane is the follow-up for Patrick. How many hits are there for Crane in this deck? Seems like every time we've seen it, it's actually found something.
Well, there's just 12, but Pat is known for being very lucky. So that does explain why his Cranes never miss.
Looks like a Voltaic Brawler coming down for Brian. Can attack through the Crane, no problem. Looks like he found a Forest off the top.
And Pat is short Aetherworks. He doesn't have Aetherworks Marvel yet, but he does have a lot of the other cards he would want. He has Kozilek's Return, which can take out that Voltaic Brawler. He's got Dispel, so he did bring in Dispel because he knows about Kibler's sideboard plan. And he's got a contingency plan, so Pat could contingency plan here to look for Aetherworks Marvel and set up potentially a turn 4 or 5 Marvel with Glassblower's Puzzle Knot in hand, so he can generate energy. So Pat has all the pieces except Marvel. things I think look fairly good for Pat, but it's not clear exactly whether he's going to be able to find Marvel in time.
And that Kozlak's return takes care of the Voltaic Brawler. I do have a couple of updates from our back tables. Ben White takes the match between him and Owen Turnwald. He wins 2-1, and Carlos Romo wins 2-0 versus Patrick Dickman.
Wow, so fast matches, fast games,
Yeah.
and Carlos and Ben both advance. So Pat's found lands. He hasn't found Marvel yet, and that's really the last key piece he's missing here. So, but Pat's gonna be able to dig for a lot of cards here. He's got both Contingency Plan and Glassblower's Puzzle Knot, so he's gonna be able to play those two cards this turn, go up to 5 energy, and then potentially find Aetherworks Marvel.
Interestingly enough, I heard from the match between Ben White and Owen that a lot of the Eldrazi were actually what took down the match.
Yeah, Ben has a very interesting deck with Eldrazi Displacers and
Reality Smashers.
and Thought Knot Seers, and just is trying to use his mono white colorless deck to pressure the opponent. Oh, so Pat, did he find Aetherworks Marvel there? Looks like
I think he might have, yes.
he's putting a card on top. Well, one thing to note is that Contingency Plan can actually set up the Eldrazi below the Aetherworks Marvel if Pat wants to. Oh, I see. So Pat actually found Gluttonous Crane, it sounds like. Notice Pat is not attacking with that Gluttonous Crane. He does not care about just getting in chip damage. Kibler's hand is actually fairly land heavy here.
Latnu Hellion coming down for Brian. And this Latnu Hellion is not dying anytime soon.
You know, Brian has a lot of energy. It is going to devour some Gluttonous Cranes over the next couple turns, though.
Oh, it was hangry. Look at that thing.
16 now?
that thing does look incredibly voracious. So this turn, Pat does have a 5th land, so he's going to, between Gluttonous Crane and Glassblower's Puzzle Knot, again, Pat's going to be able to look at a ton of cards here. So if he finds a Marvel with Dispel in his hand, he's in pretty good shape. If he doesn't find a Marvel, we're going to see the failure case of this deck.
Oh, there's a Marvel, and it was found by the Gluttonous Crane.
Pat has employed a very efficient set of cranes here.
And there we see Aetherworks Marvel, the most important card in the deck.
For sure. The deck, basically, the way it's constructed here, can't win a game where it doesn't draw Aetherworks Marvel. And that does sound risky, but realistically, when you have 4 Glassblower's Puzzle Knot, 4 Gluttonous Crane, 3 Contingency Plan, you're going to, and 2 Vessel Nascencies, you're going to be able to see a lot of cards every game.
These Gluttonous Cranes, they're so ready to jump in front of the bus. Guess the cranes were made for blocking.
And now Kibler, he's in the unenviable position of casting Tireless Tracker despite knowing a Marvel's coming down next turn with a Kozilek's return in the graveyard. So Pat found, step 1 complete, find Aetherworks Marvel. Whether he finds an Eldrazi, for step 2 is yet to be determined.
All right, so Puzzle Knot getting cracked, providing some more energy and some scry.
So Pat sees a Kozilek's return there, which is kind of enticing to cast, except that Brian has enough mana up to sack a clue to Tireless Tracker, so it wouldn't actually kill anything but the Brawler unless Kibler happens to crack clue, but Pat really does have to tap out for that Marvel next turn.
I'm at 13. That's correct.
All right, so he decides to keep one but bottom the other. We will find out very quickly which one it was.
Looks like he kept a backup Aetherworks Marvel.
So here it comes.
Yep.
All right. So
Seemed like you might have been concerned about Brian's sideboard plan.
Did you remember your Hellion?
And we might see what we saw game 1, which is, whoops.
Whoops. So it looks like Brian forgot to pay for that Latnu Hellion, so it is hungry no longer. It is now just dead. Starved.
So that's a warning for Mr.
All right, so top 6. Let's see what he finds. Oh, no, I think it's just the Gluttonous Crane.
Well, Pat's playing the Crane game very, very well here, but he was hoping to hit an Eldrazi. So that Hellion dying actually could be extremely relevant here.
Yeah, especially since it does seem like he bricked.
So
Good. Yeah, whatever.
All right, so let's see what the Crane can find off the top.
Oh, that was a great
Yeah,
draw.
Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot.
Because that not only is going to give Pat 3 life, it also gives him 3 energy, so it puts him up to 3 energy here. Crane chumping Tireless Tracker gives Pat another energy from the Marvel trigger, and so Pat's going to get to spin the wheel again next turn. You know, if Brian had a Hellion in play, this game would be a lot closer, but as it stands right now, I think Pat, despite needing to hit an Eldrazi off a Marvel, is going to get the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, we're seeing how strong it is in this deck. It does buy him basically another lottery ticket.
Yeah, and the Puzzle Knot, if you care about both resources, which in this game Pat definitely does, you spend 2 mana to get 3 life and 3 energy, so 6, and then you sack it to get another 6 with a Marvel in play that actually becomes 7 because the Marvel itself will trigger off of the Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot being sacrificed. So I kind of like Pat's spot here, especially since Kibler has, I think, correctly identified that Artifact Destruction is not really the way to defeat Aetherworks Marvel, because it just gets used when it comes into play. Now that Pat's resolved it, Kibler's just going to have to sit there and watch it do its thing.
So let's see what Brian can follow up with. He's certainly facing a lot of pressure now. That land is going to provide him another clue from that Tireless Tracker.
Yeah, so if Pat chumps Tireless Tracker here, Kibler is almost assuredly spending energy on the Voltaic Brawler. Pat takes 4, going to 8. It looks like Kibler has actually declined to spend energy. And then gets an energy counter, so Pat's going to definitely have enough energy next turn.
Even though the Tireless Tracker got blocked, Brian's still going to crack that clue.
No, I'm just playing this.
The clue is in the graveyard for...
Yeah, I think he missed.
You put it in your graveyard for some reason.
Oh, there you go.
We just had to follow the clues. That's all we had to do. Pat's somewhat confused about what was going on as well.
Yeah.
All right, so...
Long Toss Cup coming down for Brian Kibler.
So another really funny interaction here is that Aetherworks Marvel's legendary. So if Pat is running short on energy, he can play the second Marvel, and then, because of the legend rule, choose to sacrifice one of them, and then they'll both trigger. They'll both see the Marvel go to the graveyard and get 2 more energy.
That's so much value. That's awesome.
It's actually an advantage.
So it's actually a benefit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Pat going up to 7 energy by sacking or 8 energy even, because of the Aetherworks Marvel trigger. Gaining 3 life. And we keep seeing Pat spin the wheel on his main phase, and that's because if you hit Emrakul or Promised End, you really want to take their turn immediately. You need the trigger to happen now.
All right, so he gets to spin the wheel once more. Let's see if he can actually find... Oh, and it looks like he's hit at least an Ulamog.
Well, and
and an Emrakul, too.
The Royal Sampler of Eldrazi. And remember, there's a Kozilek's Return peeking out of the graveyard there, so Pat now basically has it all. He gets to decide... He gets to Kozilek's Return all the creatures away, so does he want Emrakul and to take Kibler's turn, or does he want Ulamog and to eat 2 of Kibler's lands?
What would you choose?
My inclination here would be to take Emrakul, but because Kibler has a fairly low curve deck. But honestly, I don't think there's a huge difference here. I think Emrakul's slightly better, but it's mainly because it's Emrakul, because she's flying and a little bit bigger.
So Emrakul is going to be the choice for Patrick, triggering the Kozilek's Return from the graveyard. Putting the rest of the cards to the bottom.
Pat even has Dispel backup, not that it actually is relevant here.
All right, goodbye all the creatures. All right, so we're going to see a pass back to Brian.
And he's deciding not to sacrifice his clue because...
And there's only 3 lands in hand for Brian.
Okay, I will pass the turn back. Okay, sweet. I get to take my actual turn.
So Pat could sacrifice the clue for Kibler to try to use the card against Kibler, but it looks like he's just going to let Kibler take his turn and force Kibler to spend his own mana on the clue.
Fair enough. We also got an update from one of our back tables. Yuya Watanabe versus Zach Elzik. They have evened it out. They're at 1-1. I heard that at the very end there was a long Tusk Cub that became an 8-8.
Well, so far it's the longest Tusk Cub we've seen. We haven't seen larger than 8-8. Though I suspect if we see the Electrostatic Pummeler deck in action, we'll see an even longer Tusk Cub at some point.
A Tune with Ether is a play for Brian.
Sorry. I just dropped the card.
It looks like Pat has dropped the card, so the judges are going to be taking care of it.
Both players just throwing cards
Yeah.
around. They're just going ham here.
Look, Emrakul just entered the battulfield. Things were going to get crazy, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know how to resolve that. It's like my lap. I don't really want to
Look, it's an occupational hazard when you're just flicking cards wildly.
I also don't know if it's upside down.
Both players very angry at each other right now, you can tell.
Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna try to. I can't.
Hey, one of them is trying to make partner, okay?
Yeah.
Cutthroat
He's on the
world.
partner track of CFP and Associates here. So Pat with a Marvel and 2 energy, plus a second Marvel in hand, which basically is just plus 2 energy. Pat actually has a lot of outs to spin the wheel a 3rd time, though I don't believe it's going to be necessary. If he found like a puzzle knot or something, he might be able to do it.
Play Marvel.
It's a second Marvel.
I guess I'll counter that one.
Brian decides to
Don't worry.
counter it, even though it doesn't do very much at this point.
Okay.
Draw a card to seize a hand, and there's a handshake. Patrick Cox is going to take this match, and this will put him at 5-1. He's off to a great start this Pro Tour.
In the beginning of the game, just 3 drops, 4 land. I'm like, this can't possibly be you.
We are right in time to take a look at Game 3 between Yuya and Zach Elzik, so we'll be moving to that table shortly.
This is important because Aetherworks Marvel is currently 1-1 in the feature match area. We saw Owen. Well, we didn't see. We heard.
We heard.
Owen lost. We saw Pat win, and now Yuya and Zach are on Game 3.
Interestingly enough, though, Aetherworks Marvel is such a big percentage of the metagame here this weekend, so and all different sorts of flavors of it, too.
Yeah, the only thing we haven't seen so far is a black-based Aetherworks Marvel deck, but we've seen between the Temur and Bant, that covers all the other colors.
Yuya now officially part of the Hall of Fame, looking very festive in his shirt. He was the hall dinner last night was great. He had a very emotional speech.
Yeah, you delivered a speech in English, which he wrote and presumably practiced, and did a very good job doing so.
So just a couple lands to kick us off here for Yuya and Zach. Both players are sitting at 4-1 so far.
You're one of the most accomplished Grand Prix players of all time, with 24 top 8s. And I've remembered multiple seasons where Yuya just won back-to-back Grand Prix. He almost won back-to-back Grand Prix, actually. He got first, second over the course of 3 Grand Prix. So very deserving induction into the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad to see it.
So serving on the conduit. Tapping.
And Zach had Galvanic Bolt for the first servant, but it looked like he declined to use Harness Lightning on the second. Zach also with a Spell Queller in hand.
Tamio Field Researcher coming down for Yuya.
Spell Queller seems like a fairly effective card against Yuya's deck. He doesn't have an easy answer to it, and if Zach is able to quell one of Yuya's spells, then Yuya just isn't going to be able to get it back. Whereas Yuya has his own spell Quellers, but Zach has cards like Galvanic Bombardment and Harness Lightning to unlock his own spells.
What answers does Yuya have for something like Spell Queller?
He's got Descent Upon the Sinful, but I think there's a pretty good chance that he sideboarded that out, given that that's not really what this matchup is about. So and he's bringing a bunch of creatures. So I think for the most part, Yuya is just content, with the fact that Zach's spell Quellers are going to be better than his, and sometimes you just have to live with that.
All right, Tamio's insistent on actually doing researching. So coming down on the battlefield, it resolves, and then we're going to follow up with a Long Tusk Hub.
You had an interesting spot here as well, where he could plus Tamio on Spell Queller, and now if Spell Queller attacks Tamio, then Yuya gets to draw a card.
Glimmer of Genius is the play for Zach. Gets to scry and draw 2 cards and get 2 energy.
And Zach's deck does have ways to get energy. Dynavolt Tower, of course, is the main one, but Yuya with Long Tusk Hub and Server of the Conduit out is a little bit more poised to use energy. Energy, a major part of Standard. We've seen all sorts of decks, whether they range from the Aetherworks Marvel deck, which is just tons of cards that just make energy, to even something like Li Shiqian's aggressive red-white deck that was splashing black and blue, which uses Aether Hub and Harness Lightning. So decks range from the very energetic to the minorly energetic, but there's a lot of Aether Hubs, a lot of Harness Lightnings, and a lot of Attune with Aethers in the tournament. You have Shota Yasuoka with Glimmer of Genius, providing a little bit of energy to fuel his Harness Lightnings and not really going deeper than that.
All right, so it looks like this Harness Lightning is targeting that Long Tusk Cub.
And you could make Long Tusk Cub a 4/4, but Zach would go up to 5 energy and then be able to kill it still. So you could spend 2 energy to make Zach spend 1 energy, but that's not a very good exchange rate.
Yeah, so he does just let it die.
And Zach declined to give you a card by attacking with Spell Color. You can actually attack with Servant of the Conduit now that he's plus Tamio if you'd like to. And if Zach blocks it, you will draw a card off Servant and draw a card off Spell Queller because of the Tamio ability.
We've seen some pretty clever and innovative ways of using Tamio here. It's been interesting to watch.
She's done her research.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely had some sweet games involving Tamio. She's a very powerful planeswalker. So one thing about both players kind of the draw going is, first of all, Yuya has a Planeswalker in play. So it's eventually, Tamio does threaten the ultimate of draw 3 cards and all Yuya's spells are free. The other thing is that Yuya has Emrakul, the Promised End in hand. Eventually he's going to get to the point where he can cast her. I mean, he's not very close right now, but he will get there.
All right, so another Glimmer of Genius for Zach.
You deciding whether he wants to Spell Color that Glimmer of Genius here.
Yeah, and he's going to opt for that. Down comes Spell Queller. And Zach just gets to take it down immediately. Galvanic Bombardment targeting that Spell Queller.
The second one deals 3, Spell Color dies. Glimmer of Genius, in fact, does eventually resolve. But he's actually in a kind of interesting spot where he can't just keep counterspells on top because this Planeswalker is being somewhat annoying. But Zach does have a Torrential Gearhulk there, so he has the option of going like Gearhulk, replay Glimmer, or replay one of my burn spells. So Torrential Gearhulk might actually justify keeping Void Shatter on top because it is also a threat.
So he's chosen to bottom one and top the other one. And he has kept the Gearhulk. Galvanic Bombardment taking care of the Servant.
Bit of overkill even. Certainly going to be dealing 4 to that Servant.
And it looks like he is opting it to protect. Oh, maybe.
He's going to anticipate, see what he can find, but I think that Servant is likely not long for this world.
Yes, the Servant, down it goes.
Needle Spire is also a way to threaten Tamio effectively here.
Another Ether Hub providing Zach another energy, and it looks like this Needle Spires might be getting in here.
And because Zach drew an untapped land, he actually gets to keep Void Shatter up as well. He gets to put Tamio down to 3.
All right, and Zach's going to pass back to Yuya, and representing that Void Shatter as well. Botanical Sanctum is a land. Tamio targeting that Spell Queller. Going to see an untap and a pass back to Zach. Another Spell Queller off the top. Needle Spire's getting in there again.
And you, if he goes for the Spell Queller here, which looks like he's going to, or at least he's thinking about, Zach has multiple ways to counter it.
So down comes the Spell Queller from Yuya. And down comes another Spell Queller for Zach. The Needle Spires is able to get in there and actually take down this Tamio.
Yeah, now Zach's in almost full control of the game. He needs to untap here, and once he has Void Shatter and Torrential Gearhulk up, then things get a lot more difficult.
All right, Aetherworks Marvel coming down for Yuya.
Except used just on 3 energy, his deck is not as good at producing energy as like the Temur version, for example. So especially given that it's post-board and you may have taken out some of his energy-producing cards. So Yuya really does need to find a way to get up to 6 energy in order to cast one of his Eldrazi.
He's still at a relatively high life total, so he has a little bit of time, but the clock is ticking.
Yeah, now that the Torrential Gearhulk's in play, Yuya's got, I guess, 1 draw step. That can't quite kill him here. But between Needle Spires or Wandering Fumarole, Gearhulk, and all the Spell Quellers, Yuya's getting pressured a lot. Zach went from having 4 points of power on the board to having 9.
All right, so casting that Glimmer. It looks like Zach was also able to find some counter spells off the top. Another Glimmer on the top. Glimmer has been very impressive so far. It just continues, keeps the cards flowing.
Yeah, Glimmer, it looks like it's performing in the standard environment, especially in concert with Torrential Gearhulk.
All right, and
Pass.
Yuya, who was at a 20 life total, now under so much pressure. You will be cracking that Evolving Wilds.
Yeah, but you know what? Zach with multiple counterspells in his hand, Dispel, Negate, Void Shatter, I think even if Yuya were able to find a way to make energy that Zach couldn't counter, which I'm not sure what that is, but it could be something, and resolve Aetherworks Marvel ability and hit something like Emrakul or Ulamog, Zach could maybe still win through all those cards. He could still just counter the Eldrazi. He could, give you a control of his turn or have two things get exiled, and Zach may be far enough ahead that he would have a shot here.
And it looks like it's just a forest off the top for Yuya.
And let's see, what does he have in his graveyard? So he's got Planeswalker, land, instant. Actually, he can just
Oh, wow, he can
hardcast
just hardcast Emrakul.
So he's 4 types: creature, planeswalker, instant, land. So that's 9 for Emrakul. Zach still gets to counter Emrakul, but Yuya will have control over.
All right, so it looks like he's going to kick things off by Glimmering first.
So that cast trigger will happen unless Zach finds something like Summary Dismissal, but as which he does have 2 copies of in his deck, by the way. But
Kept the card on top. He might have found it.
But even if that does happen, Void Shatter can still counter Emrakul, so at least Yuya won't have a 13/13 in play, and Yuya's going to need to find something of Zach's that can decimate Zach's board here.
Yeah, so not quite Summary Dismissal, but Void Shatter does take care of that Emrakul. Not the trigger, though. All right. So this is Yuya controlling Zach's turn.
Zach hopefully laying out his graveyard for Yuya's Torrential Gearhulk abilities. Ooh, Zach drew a Harness Lightning. So that's a kind of interesting one because Yuya can make Zach cast Harness Lightning. Zach's got 11 energy, so he can definitely do something with that. Zach has 9 lands in play, Torrential Gearhulk in hand, Dispel, Negate. Use on 7? All right.
Is it possible that controlling this turn can get him back in the game? It was looking like the window was closing.
It's going to be tight. So let's say you cast Harness Lightning, killing a Gearhulk. He could also cast another Gearhulk and then cast another Harness Lightning, killing a Gearhulk. But then Zach attacks with the 2 Spell Quellers and the Needle Spires. You can just cast a Harness Lightning, killing a Spell Queller, getting back a Spell Queller. And then you can block with Spell Queller and not die unless Zach draws an untapped land, which the Spire Bluff Canal is not going to be untapped. So if you casts Harness Lightning on the Spell Queller that has a Spell Queller under it, so the one all the way on the right there, you get the Spell Queller into play. You can also burn Zach's Negate and Dispel while doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can attack. No, he could attack one of the lands into the Spell Queller and trade, but that doesn't sound great. And then next turn, let's say he doesn't do that. He just casts Harness Lightning, kills Spell Queller, gets Spell Queller back. Next turn, Zach, if he doesn't draw a land, can't attack for lethal. But if he does draw a land, Yuya does die. Also, Harness Lightning can burn all the energy at once if that's relevant.
Just go for mega overkill on something?
Yeah.
All right, so it looks like 6
All right, so you use
for Gearhulk.
casting Torrential Gearhulk. I mean, you could. Let's see. If you cast Gearhulk, cast Harness Lightning, Harness Lightning on the Gearhulk itself, then Harness Lightning the Spell Queller. Yeah, this ends up the same way, except you get the Gearhulk out of Zach's hand. So this ends up being a little bit better, but Zach still has the 2 counters in hand. Oh, you used.
Oh, is he dispelling it?
Oh, okay. So he's dispelling it, killing Spell Queller, then Spell Quelling the Dispel, which then lets the Harness Lightning resolve, which then kills the Gear Hulk.
All of it?
And he's using all of the energy, so Zach has no energy left.
So Zach still wins if he draws an untapped land here because he has to block Gear Hulk, and Zach can animate one of his various creature lands here. So a good effort from you, getting as many cards out of Zach's hand as possible. You are still in a significant amount of trouble here.
I mean, it's great to see him play. Look at him giving himself the best out, even though, he's back against the wall right here.
Well, there goes the
That was an
untapped land.
island. There's the island. Animate.
Time, guys. This is turn 0.
And you being
Bash.
at 7 means he can block Gear Hulk,
Wow, and
that'll
there's
do
like
it.
handshake. Zach Elsick takes this match and moves on to 5-1 at the Pro Tour.
That was game 3, right?
Yeah, that was definitely game for the
The judge
players.
verifying that they're done.
Hello and welcome back to the booth. That was a sweet match.
It was. There was a lot of action going on. A hardcast Emrakul, Spell Quellers on both sides. A lot of energy, Harness Lightnings and Long Tusk Cubs and whatnot. So there was a lot going on there.
You know what's also cool? We have, I think people were a little worried about seeing a lot of Smugglers Copters, but we've seen a lot of variety.
We've seen a lot more Aetherworks Marvels than Smugglers Copters
Yeah,
so
it's
far.
been pretty sweet. But before we have any more magic, we'll send it to Rich at the news desk. What do you have for us, Rich?
Thanks very much, Gabby. Thanks very much, Luis. Yeah, that's a contender for match of the day for sure. Zach Elsick there getting to 5-1. We might get a word with him in a little while. Brian David Marshall setting that up out on the floor. All right, so there's 2 rounds to go, so 6-0. The records are narrowing down. I certainly have 6 undefeated players right now with a couple of matches still to come in. Pierre Dajon of France is 6-0 with a perfect record. Hall of Famer Kenji Samura already has 6 Pro Tour top 8s to his name, round about the halfway mark in pursuit of a 7th. He's 6-0. Matt Costa is 6-0. Valentin Mackel, he had a draw earlier in the day. He's still undefeated, but at 16 points, that's 5 wins, 5 lots of 3, 15, plus 1 point for the draw, 16. Other 6-0s, Ben White. He defeated Owen Turtenwald. That's Owen Turtenwald's first defeat as a new Hall of Famer. 5-1 for Turtenwald, 6-0 for White. Matteo More of Italy, you heard from earlier with BDM, just sneaking out a win in round 4. He's won 2 more. He's 6-0. And Eric Froelich, the Hall of Famer, is 6-0. But down on the floor is Brian David Marshall and Zach Elsick, I imagine, just getting his breath back from that pretty awesome round 6 match. BDM, what's going on down there in the feature match area?
Thanks, Rich. I'm here with Zach Elsick. Zach, Rich wants to know if you've caught your breath yet from that crazy game 3 there in that match.
I was definitely sweating. The lights don't help, and the weather is nice, but man, that was a tough one. There were a lot of decisions, and he was playing in such a way that I wasn't sure if I was getting baited here or there because the deck shifted to an Bant aggro with Tamios. I didn't see Tamios, and that was really scary, especially when it ticked up to 7. That was a close game.
Have you ever played a tougher match of Magic in your career than facing down newly elected Hall of Famer Yu Watanabe, one of the most intimidating players in the game, playing that match?
That was definitely one of the top 10 closest, hardest to think about matches, I'd put it.
So tell us what's going through your mind on that last turn. He's taking your turn. He's getting all these cards out of your hand. What happened there at the end? Did you feel like you had this game, or were you worried that it was going to slip away from you?
So I wasn't really thinking because he was just going to get to do whatever he wanted, and I couldn't do anything about that, right? Surprisingly, I hadn't seen Emrakul at all. But the Torrential Gearhulk deck that I'm playing, aside from Harness Lightning, can't really hurt itself. Because you can play a Gearhulk to flashback a counterspell or a draw spell, or you can play draw spells or counterspells from your hands. So I felt comfortable because I already had a board presence. I had a lot of man lands. So I was upset that I drew that Harness Lightning because that let him tear up. But then I drew an untapped land to get enough attackers. So it was a little bit close, but I still felt fine because I was untapping with counterspells, regardless of what was happening.
All right, I have another question for you. I was told Control was dead. What's going on with a Control deck here at Pro Tour Kaladesh?
I wouldn't say Control's dead. Like, there's a lot of sweet aggro decks, and I really did not want to play Smuggler's Copter. I don't like doing what everyone else does, so I fought really hard to try and find me a control shell that worked. I've tried a whole bunch of them, and they all felt mediocre. And then my friends hooked me up with this Dynavolt Tower list that, Dynavolt Tower can hit Smuggler's Copter, and it had a lot of removal and a lot of card draw, and going Torrential Gearhulk Glimmer Genius is one of the best things you can do. So I think Control's alive.
Well, it's doing pretty well for you right now. You're sitting here at 5-1. What's your best performance at a Pro Tour?
Pro Tour Barcelona. It was Avacyn Restored, and it was my first Pro Tour, and I got 17th. So I'm hoping to get a little bit higher. Top 8 is my goal now. I think it can happen.
You feel like this is the deck to do it? This is you feel good. You've looked around this room. You've seen what people have brought to the standard tables. You feel good about this deck going into this field?
Yes. At first I wasn't, because I wasn't sure how much aggro would be present, but there's enough Marvel Aetherworks Marvel, that it seems like my deck's really good against it because I've got counter magic. So I'm feeling a little bit up. I'm ready.
All right, Zach Elsick, he's sitting here at 5-1. Control is dead. Long live Control. Sending it back to you at the news desk, Rich Hagon.
He's so my hero. I don't like to play what everyone else likes to play, says the man who created Lantern Control for Modern. Wow, Zach Elsick there, rubbing his hands with glee, because he's got counter spells ready for the big piles of nonsense going on in Standard. Well, good luck to him. It's deck tech time now. So as we head towards round 7, it's time for Hall of Fame action. Here comes Raph Levy.